Stop saying yes to things you hate. Now, in all fairness, you're probably doing this because you want to be a nice person. You don't want to upset anyone. You don't want to put people off. It's coming from a good place, but there is a cost. There is a cost to us, to our happiness and well-being, and there is a cost to our relationships if we are constantly and continuously saying yes to things that we really don't want to be doing. So today we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about how to start having some healthy boundaries, how to say no without feeling like a selfish or bad or self-absorbed person. If you're new to me and this is the first time we're connecting, my name is Kristina, and I'm a registered clinical therapist, a coach, a researcher, and an online course creator. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology, and I work to help men and women get through the crap that is holding them back so they can like themselves and their lives more every day. And before we get right into this, let's just qualify it a little bit. And I'm not saying that we only do things that we want to be doing that are, our first choices or that we love doing, because if we go through life only doing the things that we want to do, we're going to end up finding ourselves either really lonely or unemployed. Because the truth is, sometimes we have to do things that we don't really want to do for the sake of the relationship or for the sake of not ticking off our bosses or our coworkers or our colleagues. But it does mean that we're not always doing things out of obligation or out of guilt or out of fear or out of feeling manipulated, because that doesn't feel good. When we feel like we actually aren't allowed to make our own choices, or we're not allowing ourselves to make our own choices, then we end up feeling really powerless, and we can end up also feeling really bitter and resentful and frustrated because we feel like we're not in charge of our own lives and choices if we're letting ourselves do things out of guilt, obligation, or fear all the time. But let's be honest, it can be really scary to say no, especially if you're someone who is that go-to person that everyone thinks like, oh, so-and-so, we can just get so-and-so to do it because they always step up to the plate, or they always say yes, or they're always there. And that's not that that's a bad thing, but we really have to be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves, is saying yes all the time to things that I really don't want to be doing, is that harming me? Is that actually bad for me? Is it causing me to feel bitter and resentful and angry and powerless in my own life? Is it worth it to be that yes person if it's bringing up all of these other feelings? And so we do have to ask ourselves that. We do have to check in with ourselves around that one. What is it actually costing me? The other thing that can be hard about having healthy boundaries is it does mean that we are taking responsibility for our own lives and choices. And that can also be a really tough thing, especially, if we're not used to taking that responsibility. It can be really hard to step up and say, I'm in charge of my own life and choices, and no one can make me or force me or guilt me or manipulate me into doing things. I'm not playing that game. I'm not living under those rules. I'm living under the rules that I make my own choices, that I am in charge of my own life and my own choices. And having that sense of full responsibility for ourselves, it can be really scary. It can be really hard, and that's just the truth of it. But it is also incredibly freeing and incredibly empowering when we do step into that responsibility for ourselves and our lives. But it also means that we can't blame other people quite as much if we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed or resentful. Because the truth is that when we are making our own choices for ourselves in our lives, that we can't blame other people for making us feel a certain way, because we are choosing what we will allow and what we will not allow into our lives. And that's sort of the essence of having healthy boundaries for ourselves. So when it comes to saying no and having healthy boundaries, there is good news and there is bad news. So let's start with the bad news first. And the truth is that when we say no to someone, it might put them off. It might annoy them. It might upset them. It might even hurt them. But the good news is that when we do say no and have healthy boundaries for ourselves, even though it might put somebody off, it does actually protect the relationship from harm. Because if we are feeling like we can't say no and we're feeling guilted or manipulated into saying yes, then we do develop that resentment. We develop that deeper anger towards the person because we feel like we don't have a choice, because we're feeling forced into something. And that resentment is what can really destroy a relationship. So sometimes, we have to say no, and it might hurt the person, but that hurt is actually protecting the relationship from bigger, maybe even longer lasting or permanent harm because of that resentment that we would be building up inside ourselves, and then maybe even having to cut off the relationship at a certain time because that resentment is just so strong. Or maybe we have an outburst towards that person, we freak out at them, they'll just say something or do something, but because we've built up all this resentment, they can say or do something small and we end up flipping out or losing our minds or just really just exploding on the person because of all of that resentment and frustration in us that is built up, and that can sometimes even cause irreversible damage. So allowing ourselves to have boundaries, to have healthy boundaries, and to say no in order to protect the relationship, if you can look at it like that. The other piece of good news is that having healthy boundaries is a sign of self-respect. It's a sign that not only do we value other people, but we also value ourselves. And when we're living in that integrity, when we are respecting ourselves and our own wants and needs and preferences too, then it just automatically builds our self-confidence as well. So that's the other piece of really good news, is that having healthy boundaries, learning how to say no, actually boosts our self-confidence, because we're showing ourselves that we matter and that we're worthy of respect as well. And the other part of respect is that when we do respect ourselves, then other people pick up on that cue and they end up having more respect for us as well. And I have a whole other video about this, about how to get other people to treat us with respect, and we go more in depth into that. So I'm going to put the link in the description below and make sure you grab that afterwards. So one of my favorite sayings, when it comes to having healthy boundaries and learning how to say no to things and not always saying yes to things that we don't want to be doing, that are maybe even not good for us, is that it's not all about me, but it's not never about me. And when it comes to making a decision, when it comes to being asked something or trying to figure out if you should say yes or if you should say no, when a request comes in or someone asks you to do something, a really powerful question that you can ask yourself is, if I say yes, will it make me feel bitter or angry or resentful? And if the answer is yes, saying yes is going to bring up those feelings in me, then the answer is no. I also have a free download for you called 25 Ways to Say No. So if you're someone who maybe struggles with knowing how to say no, like the specific wording, I have 25 different ways, different like word by word things that you can start using, start putting into your own kind of vocabulary, your own roster of tools you can pull out when it comes to saying no to something. So make sure you grab that. I'm going to put the link below. Leave your comments in the comments section below. Do you struggle with saying no? Does hearing this stuff and learning this stuff, does it make it easier for you? Are there people in your lives who you struggle more or less with saying no? Are there some people you really do have a hard time with? Let's talk about it. Let's carry on the discussion in the comment section below as well after the video. Like it, share it out, subscribe to the channel so we can stay connected, and come on over to my Facebook group, goodformegroup.com. It is full of the most supportive, encouraging, caring, and fun men and women. I'll put the link down below as well. Thanks for being here. Until next time, take good care.